And Deb will just ask you a very basic early question. What first brought you to Bethel?
Well, I've been teaching up at Concordia Moorhead in the French and Russian department, just teaching French. And, it ties back to being married to Tom and trying to find some place to work where he could work for Northwest and I could do what I wanted to do. So Concordia fit that mold pretty well. And I would say it's actually kind of lifestyle differences that first brought us from Concordia down to Bethel. Is the weather up in Fargo-Moorhead. People think, oh, it's the same as the Twin Cities, but it is not. It is much colder and it's always windy. So between kind of the weather and kind of the size town, and then Tom was having to commute down by airplane to go to work. So I thought, well, let's see if we can find something in Twin Cities. And I had never heard of Bethel. No, I take that back. I had gone to a Christians for Biblical Quality conference there. So I had been on campus, slept in Edgren. So that was the only contact I had with Bethel. So I thought, well, they've been involved with CBE, so it can't be too bad. So so when that job came up, I said, well, let's give it a try. So and that started fall of '99.
And what was your initial job at Bethel?
I guess it was just associate professor of modern world languages and chair of the department.
So you took on other jobs, but since you've mentioned it, CBE has come up a couple of times in interviews. Can you just say a little bit about that organization, why you were attracted to it?
Yeah, I was very fortunate when I was at Colorado College with the Christian group there. They were very egalitarian, and one of the first kind of books I read with that group was All You're Meant to Be by Letha Scansoni. And just kind of thought, oh, this is a different way of looking at feminism. And so I was taking women's studies courses at Colorado College and then going, okay, so how does this all fit together? And CBE pulled it all together. So then we'd always kind of been members and followed and supported and got to know Mimi Haddad a little bit. And then Elvira Mickelson went to our church. So that was pretty special.
Okay, so you came to Bethel as a professor and department chair, but then you moved into administration. What other roles did you fill during your years at Bethel?
Let's see, so department chair, it was kind of fun to think back through. What did I do? AAC chair, vice moderator, led the Moving the Needle project. That was a really important one for me. Bush Grant, I kind of co-did the Bush Grant with Kathy for a while when somebody had left. Director sponsored research, Associate Dean of General Education and Academic Services, and Guatemala Term Program Director. On the official side. On the unofficial side, I considered myself the server of tea and scones. I started out by doing it in the department every, I think it was Tuesday afternoon. Students from the department would come and I would serve tea, and we'd often talk about language things. So I actually have a book that has all of the interesting language things and how different students took their tea and all of that. So it was a special time. And then I always did it for the promotion and tenure committee at the last meeting of that committee, and a couple of other different committees I think I did. And then another, not really an official role at all, is I thought of myself as a supporter of administrative assistants. In one of our layoffs, there was a conversation in ELT about, okay, you need to go back to your departments and share this information. I thought, okay, so I go back to the chairs go to their departments, but the administrative assistants live in between two worlds. They don't get involved in department meetings often. I don't know very many departments where they were included in department meetings. So that was actually the first time, I think it was probably must have been the 2013, the 2009 and 2013 layoffs, and just invited them all to get together, and I told them what I knew and what was going on. And so I continued to do that kind of once a month from then on. And I know that they all really, really appreciated it because they really do get left out of the loop. Some of them were on C faculty, some of them weren't. And some departments were much better about sharing things with the admins, and some weren't.
So Deb, I'll return to our scheduled questions, but since you mentioned Move the Needle, do you want to just talk a little bit about what that project was and why it was important to you?
Yeah, so started in 2014. So it was a project to increase student success and retention. So we hired the firm Credo, who I still work with occasionally. And they came in and did tons of interviews, gathered tons of data, and looking at ways, or what are things that we could do better to make the student experience better, make them more successful, and then make them stay. So I led that project and was on 5,000 of those committees with Sam Mulberry. I found out from Joretta yesterday. I said, we had 11 modules. She said, oh, we learned so much with you guys. Like, we never gave anybody that many modules again, because that was just so much. But yet they all fit together. And that's what I really liked about this project, is I really think it changed how a lot of offices and people worked across the silos that we had between student life and academics and campus ministries, and really made us think about students. I mean, I remember there were a couple of times in the academic affairs, we'd say, well, okay, so what should we do about this? We'd say, okay, so we need to ask what's best for students. And then sometimes that just makes the answer really clear. And so it was just, I think, very impactful. I mean, when you look at it, it did make a difference in retention, and that retention has stayed. I actually went back and looked last year when I was working with another school, and our retention has stayed high and is actually remarkable. We're still remarkably high. And that because it changed the way we did things and the way we thought about things. So
Deb, just to fill in some of the details of the positions you held, you were Associate Dean of General Education and Faculty Development. Was that 2006 you started around there?
Actually, I started out in 2005, Associate Dean of General Education and Academic Services. And then somewhere along the way, and then when Deb Harless went to be acting provost, then I was acting dean of academic programs. And then I moved out of that when she came back into that position. Then it was general education and faculty development. And then when she went up to provost on a permanent basis, then what was I? That position had been her position had been called just dean of academic programs. So I guess that was is that what I was actually hired in? My title has changed so many places. I have like this whole collection of cards and name tags. But then it was changed to associate provost. And I actually asked to have added to that and vice president of academic affairs, because I'd go to a conference someplace and you'd say associate provost, and they said, well, so what do? They couldn't tell that you were on the academic side of things. So I added that to it. So that's what I retired as.
Okay. How would you describe Bethel when you first started here as a faculty member?
Growing. When I think about kind of what everything that was going on, NICAMs had just started. I think we were maybe at 2,400, looking at being a lot bigger than that. A new building, seems like they were starting a new building every year. They had just opened that section where modern world languages was across from the library. Education used to be in there, and they had just opened the CC where you guys are now. And education moved up there, and then we moved into where they were, and then just growth. They were always very committed to good teaching. And that was what drew me. I didn't want to go someplace where it was just based on how many things do you publish and who cares if you can teach or not. Because I've always been super passionate about teaching, and then actually had a really good TA supervisor when I was in graduate school, who taught me how to teach in a way that matched up with what Kathy Nevins was doing and with active learning and all of those sorts of things. So she was really far ahead of her time. So I felt like I fit well in terms of being a teaching focused institution. I think we're very siloed between the academic affairs, student life, campus ministries, CAPS, MGS. I mean, yeah. And, when I think about George Brushauer, who was the president when I came, it always seemed to me like he decided he was going to do something and he just did it. But it was a time of growth. It was a time of money was okay. And it'd be nice to have those days back again. But we were still meeting faculty as a whole, no Senate yet. We had just come through the Greg Boyd controversy. In fact, when I came and everybody was talking about it, and it was like, I have no idea what you people are talking about. So it took me about a year to kind of catch up on that. We were a place that often said we were pietistic and irenic, and it took me 2 years to figure out what that meant. Faculty and staff could not drink alcohol. So that was kind of Bethel when I came. I think of a fairly united faculty, is my sense. Yeah, so that was kind of Bethel when I came, I think.
All right, so what are the most significant ways that it had changed or maybe not changed by the time you retired?
Well, unfortunately, when I retired, the adjective I came up with was bruised. I was sitting there writing down all of the layoffs and all the programs that we shut down, and poor Jay Barnes coming in right before the financial crash and never recovering for that, the institution never recovering from that. And so it's sad to think about that kind of change. And, as I said, I retired kind of at the height of COVID. So, all of the turmoil from that, which didn't help things financially. But I do think in that, as painful as all of those layoffs and program shutdowns were, we became better at understanding how to make those decisions, how to use data better. So thank you, Dan Nelson. And trying to figure out how to do that as cooperatively with faculty as we could. I know I've used with you before, Chris, because I think you said it in the video for my retirement, as I talked about it being a dance between faculty and administration. And I thought, I always thought we faculty and administration danced well together, but it wasn't, and sometimes you couldn't tell who was leading, and that's okay.
Well, Deb, let's turn more to women's history per se, and I'll start by asking you which women impacted you most during your time at Bethel. Was there a mentor, a role model for you, or someone you mentored?
Yeah, I would say Trisha Branley, so I'm sure her name has come up. And I think it was seeing a woman in leadership, and she was very encouraging of my leadership. And I can't talk about Trisha without she'd call up and she'd go, Deb, well, what do you think about such and such? And just feeling like I could approach her, and that she would ask me about things, and so that felt very respectful and encouraging. Then Kathy Nevins, she was so skilled at and intentional about welcoming, especially new women, and onto the faculty, and doing things to get them connected. Because I remember shortly after I got there, she invited Pamela Irwin and myself to go on a trip up to Duluth just, for the day. And then another day to go strawberry picking with Carol Young, so this kind of informal, get connected to the community type of stuff she was really good at. And then just her approach of teaching and her passion for sharing that, and really felt like we were so much in sync together on what it meant to teach well. She also was the person I practiced on when I applied for the dean's job the first time. And Diana Magnuson did that the second time. And then I would say Deb Harless. She was actually, when we first came, and Barrett was faculty development coordinator. And so it asked, does anybody want a mentor? And I said, yes, I do. So that was Deb Harless. And I would say a lot of that thing, it was just kind of the practicalities of, especially when you jump in someplace as a department chair. So, I'd call an office on campus and say, okay, so how do I do such and such? And they said, well, ask your department chair. I am the department chair. I don't know how to do this. So people would always explain, but Deb was the one I could call and say, what are they talking about? Or how does this process work? Or who do I need to talk to about? That's always the biggie, was who do I need to talk to about this? And then one of the things I think I really learned from her is integrity. It's not like I didn't have integrity before that, but she was so committed to that. I always remember that she was careful about, if you said something and someone could interpret it in a more positive way than it really should be, she was always careful to make sure. Just don't misunderstand. we're not really saying that. This is really what we did. This is really what we said. And we need to be straightforward with each other about that. And then she's become a very good friend. And she and I have traveled to France together and done a bunch of other stuff. So, and then I would say actually that Jaretta, even though she's not a Bethel person, that leading, moving the needle, I mean, she's a dynamite, just full of energy and very organized. And so she was just very encouraging to me. And then probably nobody knows, very few people know about, that there was a small informal group called the Chair Babes that was Teresa DeGollier, Sandy Horn, Sandy Peterson, Dottie Haugen, and myself. So Chair Babes would go out for lunch once a month and sometimes talk about Bethel stuff and sometimes talk about other stuff. But it was, it was encouraging to, have other women at that level of leadership, because I think being a department chair is a really, really, really hard job. So plus they were just a great group of women. And then there were some, I should mention a couple of men who were encouraging to me. Mike Holmes, when I was chairing AAC, he'd say to me afterwards, it's like, okay, so you might try this, or you need to ask about that, or no, you don't want to table that, just do something else with it. So kind of helped me do that practical part of things. And John Bauer, for some reason, was always very encouraging to me, and GW, of course. So and they didn't necessarily do anything really big. It was just an encouraging word in the hall, that sort of thing.
Have you mentioned some of the other faculty who are there with you in the networks you formed? Do you have a sense of what share of the faculty in the 1990s, early 2000s were women? And did that vary much by department?
Yeah, I mean, it's always varied by department, always more in business. Because I went back and I was thinking about who were the other, make sure I didn't miss a chair babe. And there were not very many women in business department at that time. There certainly have come to be a lot more. Sciences have, I think, used to be more male dominated than it is now. And then, and I think humanities has always been kind of a more even mix. So, yeah, so I would say there were fewer women and definitely fewer in some areas. But of course, one of the things that changed when we were talking about how things, when I got hired, there were 21 new faculty that started the year I did. So talk about a huge change in Bethel in terms of hiring versus laying off, but just that growth and how that brought in, I think, more women at that time.
Right. So was it ever difficult to be a woman at Bethel? Were there ever gaps in policies or differences in expectations that you faced because of sex or gender?
amazing enough, I don't think there were. I never felt like it made any difference in, in a positive way, that I was who I was and that was fine. And of course, we never talked about salary. So, I mean, I remember some conversations about salary gaps, but I mean, most private institutions, no one wants to talk about salaries. So you don't really know what inequities there are.
It's occurred to me, maybe I should have added a word. Were there ever specific opportunities that came because you were a woman at Bethel that may not have been there at other institutions?
Depends on how conservative an institution you want to talk about. I think certainly some more conservative institutions, the opportunities would not have been there. But again, maybe I was just naive, but I just kind of thought, well, I bring what I bring, and fortunately people have respected that and promoted it.
So you spent multiple decades at Bethel. As you think about the history of women specifically at the institution, are there any transitional moments that stand out to you in those years?
Yeah. First woman campus pastor, second woman campus pastor, who's also an African-American. I mean, those were huge. And it said, I actually remember before I was coming to Bethel, I was trying to get my head around what really is their approach to women. Because you can't necessarily tell looking at the website. I mean, you get better at looking at other websites and saying, okay, no, that's probably not B, but I really couldn't tell how good a fit, whether, I remember thinking, am I trying to be I don't want to be a round peg in a square hole, or vice versa. But then seeing when I got there, it's like, oh, but when Sherry became campus pastor, that made a big difference. I mean, in a denomination that has various levels of conservatism in it, for there to be a woman pastor was actually huge. And I've certainly never, the church I'm in now has a woman pastor, but up to that, I'd never been in a church that had a woman pastor. So that was really important. And then I think Deb Harless becoming the first woman provost, it was, again, I think I kind of took it for granted that, well, she's qualified, so of course you should get it. So I'm just naive that way, perhaps. I think it finally did dawn on me, especially with the fact that the seminary would be supportive and okay with a woman provost was important.
So Deb, I know one passion of yours and a big part of your job for a number of years was the general education curriculum. And in your time, there were a couple of changes of different size to the curriculum. Do you remember themes of gender showing up in the curriculum? Was that an issue you felt like we tried to address or that we overlooked?
Good question. I think we were trying through the various forms and things that were voted in or not voted in, trying to address issues of diversity. So I think it didn't feel like it was there, something that was necessarily pointed out in the actual curriculum itself. When I think about the courses that then came out of that, especially like the P courses, the History of Women in America, what used to be an F, then became an L course. And P courses were, when I think about the titles and the content of some of those, I mean, it ties right back in with developmental teaching and developmental learning. Is you hope the students that came in as freshmen, but then they're learning along the way, and when they get there as seniors, they're really ready to tackle some of those issues. For some students, it wasn't a big deal or a big change from their background, but I know there were a number of students that, what do you mean you can have a woman pastor? Well, what do you mean that wife's not supposed to be subject to the husband? What do you mean about talking about sexuality? So So that was really important, that before my time, that the P courses especially, but the G's, the G courses as well, the comparative systems that and the U courses, all those numbers just come back just so quickly. So I think it was woven throughout there. In the last Gen Ed revision that did not get passed, the one that had the Christian and Western culture, but with cultures, I can't remember what we called it, but a much more broad and inclusive lower level BTS course, well, not BTS, but Gen Ed course on biblical studies and theology. I would have liked to have seen that happen. But
this could be taken in a lot of directions. Maybe there are multiple answers here, but how would you compare your experience as a woman at Bethel to your experience in other settings? This could be the church you've mentioned before, but also I'm especially interested, you've been part of a lot of different academic settings, you've consulted with other institutions, so I'm wondering how Bethel compares on this score to other universities and colleges too.
Certainly with Concordia and Mary Washington, where I was before Concordia, in terms of how women were treated and supportive, I think we were right there with almost the best of them. I think one of the things that Bethel's been involved with the CCCU and their women's leadership program, and that's been really important to get together with women from other institutions. And that was actually when I heard some of the horror stories of what was happening in other institutions and how women were treated or not listened to, those sorts of things. So I think in lots of ways Bethel was a strong example in the academy. It's so hard to say in larger society now, because larger society is in 5 million pieces. Certainly in terms of, we were in a really conservative Bible church in Texas, and so that was a very different approach. But I think I was still understanding what it meant to be a Christian feminist and to be egalitarian. So it's so hard to say with the larger organization. I think I'm very fortunate in that I haven't ever felt discriminated against, which is kind of remarkable for a woman of my era. Maybe it was being one of 4 daughters. So, and someone is like, you can do what you want to do.
Well, since you mentioned the phrase, could you just explain what does Christian feminism mean to you?
It means that women are innately as valuable as men, and that should be able to use their gifts as they are called, and not have structures getting in the way. It's the structures getting in the way of things, and that drives me crazy. So it just means really understanding and promoting that value, and kind of the being all that God's calling you to be. Back to that Letha Scanzoni book.
Well, a couple of broad essay questions to wrap up the interview. First of all, are there any memories or reflections that we haven't yet got to that you want to make sure to share?
No, I think we kind of got to them all. Some of I did mention that I've done I'm thinking about other people that had a big influence on me or helped change the way I think, that weren't necessarily women. And one of them was Samuel Zalanga. He was on the Guatemala term faculty when I was leading that. And just being able to sit under him and listen to his carefully thought out, but yet always he could be forceful and gentle at the same time, where he just kind of helped me understand things about race and about social inequality and economic inequality that I just hadn't before, or he was just something that someone who I could talk to very easily about that. So I feel like he had a really huge influence on me, and I'm sorry he's not there anymore. And then of course there are the Samuel Longa emails.
Well, finally, Deb, what are your hopes for Bethel, the university as an institution, its people, maybe especially its women?
That it will not become Northwestern, that it will not get more conservative, that it will not lose the liberal arts, and with that, continue to work to try to articulate the value of the liberal arts. Every student should be able to graduate explaining what a liberal arts education is and what a difference it made. And so I would hate to see us not work on both retaining the liberal arts values, or teaching students what it really means, teaching our other constituents what it means, that doesn't matter what field you go into, the liberal arts are really valuable. Our country needs people who understand the liberal arts and how to think, how to talk, understand history, understand context. So I think to be kind of a beacon for that, for Christian with liberal arts, that's my dream. I can't say I feel really positive about that right now, but you know, and financial stuff is always a challenge. So my dream would be that they not have to struggle financially and be able to make decisions based on what is best for students and best for moving us forward, rather than what's going to cost the least.